Welcome to the Sacred Wisdom channel. Why do good people suffer? Why does God allow pain and loss to touch those who are faithful and upright? These are questions that have echoed through the ages, from ancient times to our present day. The story of Job is not just a tale of suffering. It is a profound lesson of unwavering faith in the face of unimaginable adversity. Even today, when life crumbles around us, when we lose what we hold dear, Job's journey stands as a shining example of how faith can anchor us through the darkest storms. Job was a man unlike any other. He was blameless, upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. He was blessed with abundant wealth, thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. His children surrounded him, celebrating life together in love and unity. Job was a pillar of righteousness, a man whose faith was unshakable. But his faith would soon be tested in ways no one could have imagined. A heavenly wager would set in motion a series of events that would strip Job of everything he held dear, forcing him to confront the depths of his faith. But this story is not just about suffering. It's about the resilience of faith, the power of perseverance, and the transformation that comes through life's fiercest storms. It's a story that every believer needs to hear, a story that reminds us that even when God is silent, He is still present. And that is the greatest lesson of all. If this message of faith and resilience resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to Sacred Wisdom. Your presence here means everything to us, and your support helps us continue sharing these powerful biblical stories. Let's journey through the life of Job and uncover the secret of enduring faith in the face of life's greatest trials. Stay with us. The story is just beginning. In the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job. Unlike anyone of his time, Job was a man of impeccable character, blameless, upright, and deeply devoted to God. He was a man who feared the Lord and shunned evil, not just in his actions but in every thought and intention. He was a man whose life seemed to radiate with divine favor. To those around him, Job was a beacon of righteousness, a man who walked closely with God in every aspect of his life. But Job's blessings were not just spiritual. He was also a man of immense wealth and prosperity. The Bible paints a vivid picture of his riches. 7,000 sheep that roamed his fertile pastures, 3,000 camels that journeyed across the sands, and 500 yoke of oxen that tilled his abundant lands. He had 500 donkeys and countless servants, each working diligently to maintain his vast estate. Job's wealth was unmatched, making him the greatest man among all the people of the East. Yet his true wealth was not in possessions, but in his faith, a faith that was as unwavering as the mountains that stood firm against the desert winds. Yet, even with all his riches, Job's greatest treasure was his family. He was a father to 7 sons and 3 daughters. Together they formed a close-knit family, celebrating feasts in each other's homes, sharing laughter, food and wine. But Job was not just a father in the physical sense. He was a spiritual leader within his household. After each feast, Job would rise early in the morning, offering sacrifices for each of his children. "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts," he would say, seeking God's mercy on their behalf. It wasn't out of fear, but out of deep love for his family and an even deeper reverence for God. But in today's world, it's easy to mistake material wealth for divine favor. We often equate success with God's blessings, believing that prosperity is a sign of righteousness. But Job's faith wasn't rooted in his riches. It was anchored in his intimate connection with God. Even when life was smooth and abundant, Job remained vigilant in his prayers, never forgetting the one who had given him everything. And that raises a profound question for us. How often do we only pray when life is good, forgetting God when all seems well? Job's life challenges us to examine our faith, not just in times of need, but in times of abundance. Because the true test of faith is not how we praise God when everything is perfect, but how we cling to Him when everything falls apart. And for Job, the storm was just beginning. Stay with us as we unravel how this righteous man's life would take a dramatic turn, plunging him into a test that would shake the very foundation of his faith. Far beyond the earthly plains of Uz, in the realms of heaven, a solemn gathering was taking place. The sons of God, angelic beings of radiant light and celestial power, assembled before the throne of the Almighty. It was a day of divine reckoning, a day when the heavenly court convened to present themselves before the Lord. And among them, moving like a shadow in the midst of the light, was Satan, the adversary, the accuser, the restless wanderer who roamed the earth seeking whom he may devour. The Lord, who sees all and knows all, fixed his gaze upon Satan, "Where have you come from?" God asked, his voice resonating through the heavens. With a sly, defiant grin, Satan replied, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." It was a chilling declaration, a reminder that Satan's eyes are always upon us, seeking to exploit every weakness, every vulnerability, every flicker of doubt in the hearts of men. Then, with a calm yet resolute tone, God said, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." There it was. A divine declaration of Job's integrity, spoken not just to affirm Job's character, but to issue a challenge. God knew the heart of his servant, the depth of his faith, but Satan saw only an opportunity, a chance to prove that even the most righteous man would falter if his blessings were stripped away. Satan stepped forward, his eyes burning with cunning. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" he sneered. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now, stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." It was a bold accusation, a direct challenge to Job's integrity and to God's confidence in him. Satan implied that Job's faith was nothing more than a transaction, a conditional devotion fueled by prosperity and protection. In other words, Job loved God not for who he was, but for what he had given. And if the blessings were removed, Satan was certain that Job's faith would crumble like dust in the wind. God's eyes narrowed. He knew Job's heart, and he knew the strength of his faith. Without hesitation, the Lord replied, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." With those words, the boundaries were set. Job's wealth, his possessions, even his family, everything was now within Satan's grasp. But there was a limit. God had drawn a line in the sand, a divine restraint to preserve Job's life. And with that, Satan departed, his shadow vanishing as he descended back to the earth, determined to unleash a storm of suffering that would strip Job of everything he held dear. But what is the deeper lesson here? Satan's challenge reveals a profound truth that echoes through the ages. Our faith is tested not in comfort, but in loss. It is easy to worship God when life is abundant, when our barns are full and our families are safe. But what happens when the storm comes, when the walls collapse and everything we love is taken away? How do we respond when God seems to allow suffering, when heaven is silent and the adversary whispers in our ear, "Curse God and die"? Job's faith was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. And as the first wave of calamities approached, the heavens watched, the angels held their breath, and Satan sharpened his weapons. The storm was about to strike, and Job's life was about to be shattered. Stay with us as we delve into the unimaginable losses that would soon engulf this righteous man, losses that would reveal the true measure of his faith. The morning began like any other. The sun rose over the plains of Uz, casting its golden light upon Job's vast estate. In the fields, oxen plowed the soil under the watchful eyes of the servants. Camels roamed the open pastures. Sheep dotted the hills like clouds of wool. The air was filled with the sounds of life and abundance. Job's children were gathered in the eldest brother's house, feasting, laughing, sharing bread and wine. Life was good. Life was perfect. But in a single day, that perfection would be shattered. Suddenly, a servant burst through the doors of Job's house, his face ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "Master," he cried, his voice shaking. "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby when the Sabeans attacked. They stole the animals and slaughtered the servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." Before Job could even process the news, another messenger ran in, his clothes singed, his face covered in soot. "Fire of God fell from the sky," he gasped. "It burned up the sheep and the servants, consuming them in flames. I alone escaped to bring you the news." Job staggered, his heart pounding. But the onslaught was far from over. A third messenger appeared, breathless and bloodied. "Master, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties. They swept through the land, took your camels, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. Only I survived to tell you." Job's knees buckled, his hands trembled. Everything he had worked for, every ounce of wealth he had amassed, gone in a matter of moments. But the worst was yet to come. A 4th messenger entered, his face a mask of anguish, his voice choked with sorrow. "Your sons and daughters," he began, his voice breaking. "They were eating and drinking in the eldest brother's house when a great wind came from the desert. It struck the four corners of the house, and it collapsed on them. They are all dead. I alone escaped to tell you. Silence fell over Job's household, a silence deeper than death itself. Job's heart shattered. His 10 children, the joy of his life, the pride of his old age, gone in an instant. The weight of the news crushed him, pressing down on his chest like a boulder. Everything he had was lost. Everything he loved was taken. And yet, in the midst of his anguish, Job did something remarkable. He rose to his feet, tore his robe, and shaved his head, acts of mourning, of profound grief. Then, with trembling hands, he fell to the ground and worshipped. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart," Job proclaimed, his voice steady despite the tears that streamed down his face. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In that moment, Job demonstrated a faith that transcended circumstances, a faith that wasn't tied to his possessions or even his children, but to God alone. It was a faith that acknowledged that everything he had, his wealth, his family, his very life, was a gift from God, a gift that could be given or taken away in a single breath. But what does this mean for us today? In a world obsessed with material success, how do we maintain gratitude and faith when life falls apart? How do we respond when the things we once relied on, the job, the house, the loved ones, are suddenly taken from us? Job's response challenges us to rethink what we truly value. Is our faith anchored in the blessings we receive, or in the God who gives them? Are we grateful only when life is good, or can we, like Job, lift our voices in worship even when everything we cherish has been stripped away? Because in the end, the greatest test of faith is not how we praise God in times of abundance, but how we worship Him in the midst of loss. Job's life was now a wasteland, a barren shell of what it once was, but the storm had only just begun. Stay with us as we journey deeper into Job's suffering and discover how a man can remain faithful even when every earthly blessing is ripped from his grasp. The air hung heavy over Uz. The once prosperous land had become a silent wasteland. Job, the greatest man in the East, now sat alone amid the ashes. His home was empty, his children buried beneath the rubble of their brother's house. But Satan was not finished. The first strike had failed to shatter Job's faith. Now the enemy sought to strike at Job's very flesh. In the heavenly court, Satan once again appeared before God. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked, his voice stern and steady. "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it," Satan replied, his eyes gleaming with dark intent. God spoke again, his words firm and unwavering. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him without reason." Satan's face twisted into a wicked grin. "Skin for skin," he sneered. "A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." God's gaze did not waver. He knew Job's heart. He knew his faith. "Very well," the Lord said. "He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." And with those words, Satan descended upon Job like a raging storm. Days later, Job's body was covered from head to toe in painful, festering sores. His skin erupted in boils, red and swollen, oozing and cracking. His once healthy frame now writhed in agony. Fever consumed him. The itching was unbearable, the pain excruciating. Job sat in the dust, scraping his sores with a piece of broken pottery, his skin raw and bleeding. His body, once a symbol of strength and vitality, had become a battleground of suffering. But the physical pain was only the beginning. Job's suffering ran deeper, cutting into his very soul. The man who was once revered and respected was now a sight of horror. Friends and neighbors passed by without a word, their eyes averted. Job, who once ruled over his vast estate, now sat alone in the dirt, a shadow of his former self. Amid this unbearable suffering, his wife approached him, her face drawn with grief and bitterness. She had lost everything too, her children, her home, her status, and now, as she looked upon her husband, she could no longer contain her despair. "Are you still maintaining your integrity?" she spat, her voice laced with bitterness. "Curse God and die." In her eyes, death seemed a mercy. The The sight of her husband, once strong and noble, now reduced to a broken, festering shell, was too much to bear. Why cling to integrity when life had become a waking nightmare? But Job's response was not what she expected. He lifted his blistered, trembling hands and looked at her. His voice firm, yet gentle. "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks," he said. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In that moment, Job reaffirmed his faith. Despite the agony that coursed through his body, despite the loss that had torn his heart to shreds, he refused to curse God. He refused to blame the one who had given him life. Job's faith was not transactional, it was unconditional. But what about us? When suffering strikes our health, when our bodies become prisons of pain, how do we respond? It's easy to trust God when life is good, when our health is strong and our days are filled with joy. But what happens when the body that once carried us falters, when pain becomes our constant companion? Job's response challenges us to look beyond our circumstances and see God's hand even in the midst of suffering. He reminds us that faith is not about the absence of pain, but about trusting God despite the pain. It's about clinging to the one who is greater than our suffering, even when our flesh cries out for relief. Job's suffering had only just begun, but his faith remained unshaken, and as the days stretched into weeks, his torment grew heavier. But the real test was yet to come, the test of words, of accusations, of friends, who would soon arrive not to comfort, but to condemn. Stay with us as we witness how Job's faith will be challenged not only by physical agony, but by the cruel words of those he once called friends. The next chapter will reveal how words can wound deeper than any sword. News of Job's suffering spread quickly across the land of Uz. Word reached his three closest friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. These men, who once revered Job as the most righteous man in the East, now set out to visit him, to offer comfort and counsel. As they approached, they saw a figure sitting in the ashes, his body covered in sores, his skin cracked and bleeding. The man before them was unrecognizable. This was Job, the man who once commanded great respect and ruled over vast lands. Now he was a broken shell, reduced to a pitiful sight, scraping his wounds with a shard of pottery. Overwhelmed by the sight, the three friends tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads, a sign of deep mourning. Then they sat beside Job in the ashes, silent for 7 days and 7 nights. Not a single word was spoken, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. But silence cannot hold grief forever. After 7 days, Job could no longer contain his anguish. With a voice heavy with pain, he cursed the day he was born. "Let the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, 'A boy is born.' May darkness and deep shadow claim it." Job's lament echoed through the ashes, a cry not of blasphemy but of unbearable sorrow. He did not curse God, but he cursed the very day he entered this world of suffering. He questioned why he had not died at birth, why he had been spared only to endure such agony. Seeing Job's despair, Eliphaz could no longer remain silent. With the calm confidence of an elder, he spoke. "Job, you have counseled many, strengthened the weak, and offered comfort to the troubled. But now calamity strikes you, and you falter. Is not your fear of God your confidence?" Eliphaz paused, his gaze steady. "Consider this. Who, being innocent, ever perished? Those who sow trouble reap it. Perhaps, Job, your suffering is God's discipline, a lesson to correct you, a divine rebuke for hidden sins." Job listened, but his eyes remained fixed on the dust. Was this all his life had come to? Was his suffering merely divine punishment? Before Job could respond, Bildad spoke, his tone more severe. "Your children are dead, Job, but if they sinned against God, he delivered them to the penalty of their sin. But you, if you are truly blameless, plead with God. He will restore you." Bildad's words stung like a dagger. To imply that Job's children perished because of their sins was more than Job could bear. His heart ached, not only from the loss, but from the cruel insinuations of a friend. Then Zophar, the most blunt and uncompromising of the three, leaned forward, his eyes flashing. "Are you really going to keep defending yourself, Job? God is just. If you are suffering, it's because you deserve it. Repent, and God will forgive you. Stop claiming innocence when your suffering clearly shows your guilt." Job's eyes met Zophar's, his jaw clenched. His friends had come to comfort him, but instead they had become accusers. Each one pointed to his suffering as evidence of sin, as proof that Job was guilty of some hidden wrong. But Job knew his heart. He knew he had walked uprightly, that he had not turned from God. And so, with a voice that trembled with both pain and defiance, he replied, "How long will you torment me and crush me with words? I have not sinned. I have maintained my integrity. But God has hidden himself from me. Why does he not answer me? Why does he treat me as an enemy?" Job's cry was not just a defense. It was a plea for divine clarity. He had lost everything, his wealth, his children, his health, and now he was losing the trust of his closest friends. But even as he questioned God's silence, Job refused to curse him. His faith remained, though it was now mingled with confusion, desperation, and grief. Job's friends represent the well-meaning but misguided comforters we often encounter in life. They spoke with conviction, confident they were defending God's justice, yet they failed to see Job's heart. How often do we assume that suffering is a sign of sin? How quick are we to judge, instead of simply sitting in the ashes with those who suffer? Job teaches us that true faith does not demand answers, but clings to God even in the silence. His lament is not a rejection of God, but a raw, honest cry from a heart that still seeks him amidst the ashes. And as we shall see, even in the silence, God is still there. Stay with us as we move into the next chapter, where a new voice will enter the scene. A young man named Elihu, who will challenge both Job and his friends with a perspective neither had considered. For days, the debate between Job and his three friends had raged on, each man offering his own interpretation of Job's suffering, each one convinced he held the answer. But none of them had truly brought comfort to Job. Their words had only deepened his wounds, piling accusation. Sitting silently in the background was a young man named Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite. He had listened intently to every word, his heart burning with frustration. Though he was the youngest, he was also the most passionate, and now, as the older men fell silent, Elihu finally spoke. "I am young in years, and you are old," he began, his voice steady yet respectful. "That is why I was afraid to tell you what I know. I thought age should speak, advanced years should teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives them understanding." Elihu's words carried a different tone, neither condescending like Zophar nor judgmental like Bildad. His approach was bold, yet earnest, seeking not to condemn but to clarify. He turned to Job, his eyes firm and sincere. "Job, you have said, 'I am innocent, but God denies me justice.' But consider this, God is greater than any mortal. Why do you complain to him that he does not answer your words? For God speaks in one way and in another, yet no one perceives it." Elihu paused, his gaze fixed on Job. God may speak through dreams, through visions, through whispers in the night. He may use pain and suffering to turn a man from pride, to keep his soul from the pit. Suffering, Job, is not always a punishment. It can be a divine intervention, a means of correction and growth. Elihu's words pierced the air like a sharp blade. Unlike Job's three friends, who insisted that suffering was solely the result of sin, Elihu offered a different perspective. Suffering could also be a tool for refinement, a furnace in which faith is purified. Elihu then turned to Job's friends, his tone firm. "You men have claimed to speak for God, yet you have not refuted Job's words. You have condemned him without understanding his heart. You have offered no wisdom, only accusations. If you cannot give him an answer, then listen to me, for I will speak what is true." The friends shifted uncomfortably. Elihu was younger, yet his words carried the weight of conviction. Unlike the others, he did not seek to prove Job guilty. Instead, he sought to redirect Job's focus from his suffering to God's sovereignty. Elihu continued, his eyes bright with fervor. "Job, you have demanded that God give you an account, that he explain his actions. But who are we to demand anything of the Almighty? Consider the power and wisdom of God. He sends the rain to nourish the earth, commands the lightning and stirs the wind. He governs the sun and the stars, the animals and the seas. His ways are beyond our comprehension." Job remained silent, his head bowed, his heart heavy. Elihu's words struck a chord. It was true, he had demanded answers from God, questioned his justice, accused him of neglect. But had he ever stopped to consider that his suffering might have a purpose beyond punishment? "Listen to this, Job," Elihu said, his voice softer now. "God is speaking to you, even now. He is not silent. You are just not listening. Seek not to accuse him, but to understand what he is trying to teach you. The very pain you endure may be the very voice of God, a call to draw nearer, to trust deeper, to learn that his ways are higher than ours. Elihu's words carry a powerful lesson for us all. In a world that seeks quick fixes and easy answers, we often miss the deeper lessons embedded in our suffering. We cry out for explanations, demanding that God justify our pain. But what if our suffering is not a punishment, but a refining fire? What if, like Job, the pain we endure is a divine call to examine our hearts, to seek God's wisdom, to learn patience and trust in the silence? Elihu reminds us that God's ways are not always immediately clear, but they are always purposeful. In our pain, we must ask not just, "Why is this happening?" but "What is God teaching me through this?" Elihu's words have laid the foundation for what is to come, for in the next chapter, the one voice Job has longed to hear will finally speak. God himself will answer Job, not with explanations, but with revelations. Stay with us as we witness the Almighty's powerful response from the storm. The sky darkened, and a powerful whirlwind rose up, swirling around Job as he sat in the ashes. The winds howled like a furious storm, and from within the tempest a voice thundered. God's voice. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge?" The voice echoed through the heavens, shaking the ground beneath Job. "Brace yourself like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment he had cried out for, an audience with God himself. But the Almighty did not come with answers. Instead, he came with questions. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy." Job was silent. How could he answer? He had demanded to know why he suffered, but now God was revealing the vastness of his creation, the very cosmos Job had never considered. "Have you commanded the morning or shown the dawn its place? Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this." The questions kept coming, each one more humbling than the last. God's words painted vivid images of the universe's grandeur. The heavens stretched like a canopy, the sea given its boundary, the constellations set in place by his hand. Job felt himself shrinking under the weight of such divine power. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? God's voice boomed like thunder, and the whirlwind swirled with even greater intensity. Job, the man who once demanded answers, now found himself overwhelmed by the enormity of God's creation. Then God's tone shifted, drawing Job's attention to two creatures that symbolized chaos and power, Behemoth and Leviathan. "Look at Behemoth," God said, "which I made along with you. It feeds on grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins, its power in the muscles of its belly. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. Can anyone capture it by the eyes or pierce its nose?" Behemoth, a creature of unstoppable power, was untamable by man. It moved at God's command, a reminder that the Creator's power extends over all living things. Then came Leviathan, the sea monster, a symbol of untamed chaos. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it beg you for mercy? Will it make a covenant with you? Will it speak to you with gentle words? The image was clear. If Job could not control these mighty beasts, how could he hope to comprehend the vastness of God's creation and the mysteries of his plans? Job's eyes filled with tears. God had not answered the question of why he suffered. Instead, God had shifted the focus entirely. Job had sought to understand his pain, but God had revealed the infinite complexity of the universe, reminding Job of how little he truly understood. In the presence of such power and majesty, Job fell to his knees. The man who once demanded answers now found himself silenced by awe. "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Job's suffering had not been explained, but his perspective had been forever altered. He realized that the universe was vast, complex, and far beyond human understanding. God's wisdom was infinite, his purposes incomprehensible. And in that moment, Job finally found peace. Not in answers, but in the presence of the Almighty. The whirlwind subsided, and the air grew still. Job remained kneeling in the ashes, his heart pounding, his soul laid bare before the Almighty. He had demanded answers, but now he was humbled, brought low by the sheer majesty of God's voice. "I know that you can do all things," Job whispered, his face pressed to the dust. "No purpose of yours can be thwarted. I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Job had not received an explanation for his suffering. Instead, he had received a revelation, a glimpse of God's incomprehensible power and wisdom. And in that moment, Job found what he truly needed. Not answers, but the assurance that God was in control, even amidst chaos. Then the voice of God turned to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, the three friends who had spent days accusing Job of hidden sins, insisting that his suffering was a direct result of some secret wrongdoing. "I am angry with you," God said, his voice stern. "You have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has." The three friends trembled. They had claimed to speak for God, yet they had only added to Job's torments with their false accusations. Now God instructed them to take 7 bulls and 7 rams and offer a burnt sacrifice, and to go to Job, the very man they had condemned, and ask him to pray for them. "My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer. I will not deal with you according to your folly," God declared. It was a profound reversal. The man they had condemned was now the one whose intercession they needed to escape God's wrath. Job, the man who had suffered, who had been falsely accused and abandoned, was now called to pray for those who had wronged him. And Job did not hesitate. With a heart softened by his encounter with God, he prayed for his friends. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge, only compassion and forgiveness. And as Job prayed, a transformation began. The Lord restored Job's fortunes, giving him twice as much as he had before. Where once he had 7,000 sheep, now he had 14,000. Where once he had 3,000 camels, now he had 6,000. He received 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 female donkeys. His wealth overflowed, but the restoration was not just material. God also restored Job's family. He was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters, beautiful daughters whose names would be remembered for generations: Jemimah, Keziah, and Keren-Happuch. Unlike in the customs of that time, Job granted them an inheritance along with their brothers, a symbol of his newfound generosity and gratitude. Job lived another 140 years, long enough to see his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And in his final days, he was surrounded not by loss, but by laughter, by the sight of his descendants playing in the fields, by the warmth of family and friends who had once abandoned him in his suffering. But the true restoration was not in Job's possessions, or even in the new children he held in his arms. It was in his heart, a heart that had been humbled, refined, and deepened by suffering. Job had once known of God through tradition and hearsay. Now he knew God intimately. He had seen God's power, felt his presence, and experienced his mercy firsthand. The story of Job's restoration is often told as a tale of divine recompense, a happy ending that erases all pain. But Job's restoration was not just about receiving back what was lost. It was about transformation. God did not just restore Job's wealth and family. He restored Job's understanding of who God truly is. The man who once demanded explanations now rested in the assurance of God's wisdom and sovereignty. The man who had once cried out for justice now prayed for those who had wronged him. In our own lives, how often do we focus solely on the restoration, the happy ending, the material blessings we hope to receive after a trial? Yet Job's story reminds us that true restoration is not about what we get back, but what we become in the process. Job had been brought to his knees, his world shattered, his heart broken. But in the ashes he found a new understanding of God, an understanding that would remain with him until his dying day. And that, more than the sheep or the camels or the silver and gold, was the true gift. The story of Job closes not with answers but with a profound revelation. Our trials may not always make sense, but in the end God is still sovereign, still good, and still present, even in the whirlwind. The story of Job is not a tale of loss and restoration. It is a revelation of what true faith really means. Throughout his journey, Job had been stripped of everything he held dear: his wealth, his children, his health, and even the respect of his closest friends. Yet in the midst of that unimaginable suffering, Job never abandoned his faith in God. Job's unwavering trust was not rooted in the blessings he once had, but in the God he still knew. Though he had cried out in anguish, questioned and lamented, he never turned away from the Almighty. Instead, he fell to his knees and declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job's story teaches us that the truest faith is forged not in comfort but in adversity. It is easy to praise God when life is good, when the blessings are overflowing, when prayers are answered as expected. But when the world collapses, when health fails, when loved ones are lost, what then? Job's faith shows us that true trust in God is not dependent on our circumstances, but on the character of God himself. Even when he was left with nothing but his pain and confusion, Job still clung to the belief that God was good, even when he couldn't understand why he was suffering. And that is the essence of enduring faith. Not the faith that demands answers, but the faith that trusts even when there are none. When God finally spoke from the whirlwind, he did not explain Job's suffering. He did not justify the loss of Job's children, the devastation of his wealth, or the torment of his body. Instead, God revealed his majesty, the vastness of creation, the mysteries of life and death, the power over the stars, the oceans, the wild beasts. Job had demanded answers, but in the presence of God he realized that the answers were not what he truly needed. He needed the presence of God himself. He needed to be reminded that the creator of the universe was still sovereign, still good, still in control. And in that moment, Job's faith was restored, not because his fortunes were doubled, not because he was healed, but because he finally saw God as he truly was, infinitely wise, eternally just, and incomprehensibly loving. The ultimate reward of Job's story was not the restored wealth, the new children, or the doubled livestock. It was the intimate encounter with God, the profound revelation that, even in the storm, even in the ashes, God was still there, still speaking, still holding Job's life in his hands. And that is the greatest lesson Job's story offers us today. Our faith is not measured by how much we gain or how quickly our suffering ends. It is measured by our ability to trust in God's goodness, even when we are walking through the fire. It is the faith that whispers, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job's story is more than a tale of suffering and restoration. It is a powerful testament to the strength of unwavering faith. In the face of unimaginable loss, Job refused to abandon his trust in God. He questioned, he lamented, he wept, but he never let go of his faith. And in the end, it wasn't the restoration of his wealth or the birth of new children that brought true healing, it was the revelation of God's presence. Job's journey reminds us that life's storms are not always punishments, but opportunities for spiritual growth. When we feel abandoned, when the world seems to crumble around us, we can look to Job and remember that even in the ashes, God is still near. His presence is our true reward, and his wisdom surpasses our understanding. So, as you face your own trials, remember Job. Remember that faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who holds the answers. Even when we don't understand, even when life doesn't make sense, God is still there, and he is still good. If Job's story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you to hold on just a little longer, please like this video and subscribe to Sacred Wisdom. Your support helps us continue sharing these timeless biblical lessons. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your own faith story in the comments below. How has God carried you through the storms of life? Thank you for being here with us. Until next time, may your faith be steadfast, your heart be strong, and may you find God's presence in every season of your life.